Albert Kite was always punctual, so when he didn't show up for work on Monday, May 24th, 2004, his colleagues knew something was definitely wrong. That afternoon, police arrived at his quiet Aurora, Colorado townhouse to perform a welfare check and discovered a basement of horrors beyond human comprehension. The 53-year-old lay deceased, face down on the floor, and all evidence indicated he had been subjected to unimaginable acts for hours. This was the start of a chilling, unsolved mystery that haunts Aurora to this day. Al had been a hard-working man with a comfortable life. He was known for his kind, helpful nature among friends and co-workers. By 2004, the 53-year-old was looking forward to a new chapter. He had recently begun a promising relationship with a woman named Linda, and he was searching for a new roommate to rent his basement apartment. Nothing in his life foreshadowed the terror that was about to be unleashed. He soon found an eager applicant for the vacant room. On May 19, 2004, a man calling himself Robert Cooper responded to Al's newspaper ad, claiming he had just moved from the East Coast for a job with Wells Fargo. The man met Al in person, paid a security deposit and half a month's rent up front, and received a house key. It all seemed like a routine rental arrangement. During one visit, Al's girlfriend Linda was at the house, but the prospective renter slipped away before Linda could get a good look at him. She did notice he appeared middle-aged with dark hair and walked with a limp using a cane. Still, everything about Robert Cooper seemed normal enough, and Al was glad to have a new tenant lined up. He had no idea that he was letting one of the most depraved predators possible into his home. Unbeknownst to Al, Robert Cooper had approached several other landlords in the area that same week, each time presenting a slightly different persona. One landlord recalled a man of a similar age with no limp and an Eastern European accent. Another remembered an older man who walked with a cane and spoke without an accent. Neighbors of Al later reported similarly strange encounters with the new tenant. One neighbor's greeting was ignored entirely, and another saw the man on a walking trail moving without any limp at all. It was as if he were a chameleon, altering his age, accent, and behavior to deflect suspicion. Saturday, May 22, 2004, began normally for Al. That morning, he drove Linda to the airport for a week-long trip. After seeing her off, he spent the day doing household chores. Around 3:30 p.m., when Linda's flight landed, she called Al and found him in good spirits. He said he had just finished fixing a leaky pipe in his basement with a neighbor's help. They wished each other a nice weekend, anticipating that they would be reunited soon. Tragically, that brief phone call was the last time anyone is known to have spoken to Al. Sometime over the next 2 days, the man calling himself Robert Cooper returned to Al's home to carry out his cruel plan. On Monday morning, May 24th, Al's absence at work set off alarms. Concerned coworkers contacted his sister, and Aurora police were dispatched to check on him. Officers arrived to find no answer at the door. After entering the house, they discovered Al's lifeless body on the basement floor. I don't generally get into the gruesome details for cases like this, but let's just say the level of violence visited upon Al might make a medieval inquisitor nauseous. The perpetrator had gone to great lengths to cover his tracks. Several of Al's own kitchen knives, a glass, and even the key that this so-called Robert Cooper had been given were found soaking in a bleach-filled sink, as if to destroy fingerprints and DNA. The house had been wiped down with bleach, and bleach had been dumped down all the drains in an effort to wash away any trace evidence. Before fleeing, the perpetrator stole Al's wallet, cell phone, and pickup truck. Early on Sunday, the suspect was caught on an ATM camera wearing a ski mask and gloves, withdrawing about $1,000 using Al's debit card. He then abandoned Al's truck a few blocks away and discarded the stolen cell phone in a payphone booth. In a final act of caution, the perpetrator even took out Al's trash, presumably just in case any trace elements of his existence from the previous visits were found within. With the crime scene secured, detectives focused on the mysterious renter as the prime suspect. Tracking him down, however, proved nearly impossible. The rental application Robert Cooper had filled out was completely fraudulent. The name was an alias. The listed address was a building at a local campus, not a residence. The social security number belonged to an elderly woman in another state, and the reference phone number was for a retirement home. Everything was bogus information, and unfortunately Al, being a trusting and honest guy, clearly just went with his gut feeling. Investigators also discovered that the phone Cooper used to contact Al was a prepaid burner phone bought 2 months earlier and activated about 30 days after purchase. By waiting a month to activate it, the suspect ensured the store's surveillance footage of the phone purchase had been deleted, leaving police no video of him buying it. This level of pre-planning astonished detectives. At every turn, the perpetrator had anticipated how to obscure his trail. Despite the perpetrator's precautions, police did obtain a sample of his DNA from that drop of blood on the stairs. Frustratingly, when they ran the profile through national databases, it matched no known offender. The case had turned into a baffling whodunit, a shape-shifting suspect who vanished without a trace, leaving only an alias and an unknown DNA profile behind. Piecing together witness accounts gave investigators a hazy picture of who Robert Cooper was, at least in terms of physical appearance. Notably, the descriptions of the man were quite generic, for lack of a better term. By most descriptions, he was a white male of average height with a medium build and medium brown to dark brown hair. Witnesses placed him somewhere between his late 30s and 50s, and noted that his appearance and behavior could change. Some recalled a slight Eastern European accent, and that he walked with a limp aided by a cane, while others remembered no accent and no limp at all. Clearly, the suspect was adept at deception, altering his persona to avoid leaving any consistent impression. Investigators even consulted experts for insights, and the knots used to bind Al were so precise that one expert theorized the perpetrator might have had military or nautical training. Notably, the perpetrator also conducted a form of foot whipping, which is popular in the Old World, but almost entirely unknown in the States. This technique can leave someone with a permanent pronounced limp. Further, it's a technique which is still commonly used in Russian prisons. Combined with the Eastern European accent and the occasional limp, I have to speculate whether Robert Cooper may have experienced a similar technique used on him. Or perhaps, given the extreme lengths he took to cover his tracks, he knew how to feign the symptoms of undergoing foot whipping. Anyway, let's get back to the investigation for the moment, but I'll have more to say about my own personal theories on this disturbing case shortly. Perhaps unsurprisingly, detectives also struggled to identify anything approaching a motive in this case. The brutality suggested deep anger or a personal vendetta, yet they found no one in Al's life who had a reason to hurt him. While the perpetrator did take some money, the ferocity of the attack far exceeded a typical robbery. Investigators came to believe that the true motive was the thrill of the act itself. According to investigators, this was likely an opportunistic predator who selected Al simply to satisfy a craving for violence. They believed that he would have done this to any person who had agreed to rent a room to him and handed over the keys. Al just happened to be the unlucky person who went through with the deal. Over the years, various theories have emerged about who Robert Cooper really was. Some suspect he was a professional hitman or ex-military operative, given his discipline and meticulous planning. Others theorize an international connection, noting the unusual foot whipping method and hints of an Eastern European background. Another view is that he was an uncaught serial predator who had honed his skills on other victims. In favor of this, the way he canvassed multiple rental homes suggests a predator searching for the perfect target. Even though the trail is cold, the case remains open. Investigators have also turned to new technology in hopes of finally unmasking the perpetrator. In 2017, Aurora police released a DNA-based composite image of the suspect, showing what he might have looked like at various stages in life. Notably, he presented himself as various ages to the people he met, so his exact age is unknown. The DNA analysis suggested the suspect had fair skin and European ancestry, consistent with witness impressions. Unfortunately, the specifics of his European ancestry haven't been publicly released, though I suspect that this is because this is an active and ongoing investigation. The authorities have retained a genetic genealogy company in relation to this crime and may currently be working on building out his family tree. One theory I've considered is that the drop of blood found at the crime scene wasn't accidental at all, but intentionally placed there by the perp as a red herring. Given the extremely meticulous nature of the crime, leaving behind a single drop of blood feels strangely inconsistent. It's plausible Robert Cooper planted this blood, knowing authorities would latch onto it as a definitive clue. By introducing DNA from someone entirely unrelated, he could have effectively diverted the investigation down a false path. Authorities have been relying heavily on this DNA sample to identify their suspect, confident it's the key to solving the case. It's unsettling to consider, but entirely possible, that this small drop of blood was yet another trick played by this chameleon predator. While I clearly find this theory compelling, it does have its weaknesses. Transporting someone else's blood without contaminating it with your own DNA is a risk. The smallest mistake could result in a mixed sample, which would raise immediate red flags for investigators. Sourcing the blood is another major hurdle. Unless the perpetrator had access to medical waste, vulnerable individuals, or illicit sources, obtaining a viable and uncontaminated sample would be logistically complex and risky. I feel I'm also obliged to mention Occam's razor here. The simplest and most likely explanation is that the perpetrator was injured during the attack and unknowingly left a trace behind. That said, I'm not sure to what degree Occam's razor can be applied to this case, due to the fact that we know Robert Cooper engaged in multiple layers of deception. In a quote-unquote normal case, mentioning that the unknown DNA profile found at the scene could be from someone else would basically be absurd. But the slaying of Al Kite by this unknown sinister figure is no normal case. Not even close. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just shouting out all my subscribers, members, and patrons. Also gotta take a moment to plug Lazy Chill True Crime, which is available on YouTube itself or in audio form as a podcast. Just search up Lazy Chill True Crime on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. In June 1976, 18-year-old David Stack set out to hitchhike from Broomfield, Colorado to California. He was a recent high school graduate with a free-spirited, adventurous personality and a knack for making friends wherever he went. David came from a large family and hoped to visit his siblings in Northern California, including a brother who worked as a carpenter there. With little money on hand, he chose to hitch rides across the West, a common practice in the 1970s, when many people saw hitchhiking as a relatively safe way to travel. Of course, as we know now, this once common practice ended up being exploited by predators. On June 1st, 1976, David departed with a backpack, optimistic about the road ahead. As the weeks passed with no word from David, his family grew deeply concerned. His relatives in California confirmed that he never arrived. and at first his parents and siblings tried to remain hopeful. They wondered if David might have changed plans, gone on a side adventure, or simply taken longer than expected. But by midsummer, it was very clear that something was very wrong. Unbeknownst to his loved ones, David's journey had come to a tragic end in Utah. On June 10, 1976, a worker at a landfill near Wendover, on the border with Nevada, discovered the body of a young man. Authorities in Toole County responded and began investigating the death. The victim was a white male around 17 to 20 years old, with shoulder-length brown hair and brown eyes. He wore a tan shirt, patched blue jeans, and a black belt, but he had no identification on him. The medical examiner noted the young man's build and features, including a small scar on his forehead and a slight deformity in one toe. For investigators at the time, however, none of these clues were enough to reveal the young man's name. In hindsight, those details would later line up with David Stack's description. The autopsy revealed he met a violent end, with 2 bullet holes noted in the John Doe's skull. Investigators kept the specific detail of the wounds secret from the public, a strategy often used to filter out false leads. They announced only that a John Doe had been found slain near Wendover. Police canvassed the area and learned that a hitchhiker resembling the victim was reportedly seen in town on June 9th, the day before the body was found. It appeared that David made it that far west, likely catching rides along Interstate 80, but somewhere near the Utah-Nevada border, he met a deadly fate. Initial efforts to identify the slain teenager were unsuccessful. In the 1970s, there were no national databases linking missing persons with unidentified remains. Despite being in the next state over, the description of the John Doe in Utah never made its way to authorities in Colorado at the time, so nobody connected the dots. With no name and no suspects, the investigation stalled. The unknown young man was buried in a pauper's grave in Toole County, and the case went cold. For decades, David Stack's family endured the pain of not knowing what happened to him. His parents and siblings never stopped wondering if he might be alive somewhere. Year after year, they held out hope, and David's mother passed away in 2011, still believing her son could return one day. The family's search was made harder by the fact that David's case had no leads whatsoever. He was simply last seen heading west, and then he vanished. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation kept his case on file, and the family continued to publicize his story in hopes of a lead, but nothing surfaced. Over the years, information about David's disappearance slowly made its way into various police files and missing persons networks. Likewise, the unidentified Toole County John Doe case remained on file in Utah, though without anyone to advocate for him in that capacity. This case received little attention. In 2010, the unidentified victims' details were entered into the Name Us database, a centralized repository designed to match missing people with unknown remains across the country. This was and remains a game-changer that can connect cases with just a few keystrokes, something that had been virtually unimaginable in the 1970s. It would prove crucial, but the pieces didn't fall into place immediately. In 2014, 2 cold case detectives in Utah revisited the old John Doe file and used Name Us to search for potential matches. David Stack's profile surfaced. He was the right age, had vanished in 1976 while hitchhiking, and his physical description was similar to the unknown victim. Investigators compared dental records from the John Doe with David's dental records that were on file. The similarities were striking enough that in May 2015, the authorities exhumed the unknown body from its grave to obtain DNA samples. David's siblings provided their DNA for comparison as well. After a few weeks of analysis, The results confirmed what detectives had strongly suspected. In August 2015, authorities publicly announced that the John Doe found in Utah back in 1976 was indeed David Stack. Nearly 39 years after his death, David finally got his name back, and these two previously unconnected cases fully intersected. The news brought a mix of heartbreak and closure to his family. They were devastated to finally have confirmation of the painful fate they had long feared. Still, they were grateful to at least know the truth, and to be able to reclaim David's remains for a proper burial. His body was returned to his family, and he was finally laid to rest under his own name. With David's identity established, the case was officially reopened in 2015. Investigators now had new avenues to explore, and they could attempt to retrace David's path. They could connect the two files and try to find witnesses who might remember seeing him, or recall any suspicious individuals on the road that summer. The challenge, however, was enormous given the passage of time, and as of now, it appears that no further meaningful leads have ever been found in this matter. No perpetrator has ever been publicly identified, and the motive for this brutal attack remains entirely unknown. There are several theories about what might have happened. The most likely scenario is that David accepted a ride from someone who then turned violent. It could have been a robbery, or something much darker, that ended in a slaying. Unfortunately, these sorts of predators like to target young hitchhikers during this time period. Some even speculate that he might have fallen victim to a serial predator who preyed on hitchhikers in that era. Perhaps just as disturbingly, it may well have been a solitary act of violence by a stranger passing through the area. Unfortunately, the final pieces of the puzzle for justice in David Stack's story remain out of reach. Given the lack of additional forensic evidence, it now appears that the best opportunity to truly resolve this case would be if someone remembers something they saw in 1976. Heather Sellers was a 20-year-old woman living with family in Spartanburg, South Carolina. She had some previous troubles with addiction, but according to her family, she had gotten her life together in the previous year. On September 24, 2002, Heather's grandmother dropped her off for an evening shift at the Waffle House near Highway 9 and Interstate 85. Heather carried an overnight bag, planning to stay at her aunt's house after work. Tragically, she never made it home that night. After finishing work, Heather met up with her ex-fiancé, 22-year-old Jonathan Vick. They had broken off their engagement just 2 weeks earlier, but were still seeing each other despite the breakup. That evening, the two visited two local bars, a place called the Rainbow Lounge and another called Cocktails and Dreams. Those outings were the last confirmed sightings of Heather. She never returned to her aunt's, and she never showed up to collect her last paycheck at the Waffle House. Heather's family realized immediately that something was wrong when she failed to come home or call. Disappearing without a word was completely out of character for her. Heather was in regular touch with her relatives and wouldn't drop out of contact like that. Alarmed, her family reported her missing to the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office and quickly mobilized to search. They contacted friends, drove along Heather's usual routes, and put up missing person flyers around town. Despite these efforts, the early searches turned up nothing. No clues to what happened at all. From the start, Jonathan Vick became the primary focus of the investigation. He was the last person known to have seen Heather alive, as witnesses had spotted them together on the night she disappeared. Heather and Vick's relationship had been tumultuous, and she had confided to family that Vick was abusive during their time together. Further, their breakup 2 weeks before had been extremely tense, and she advised her family that she was scared. Naturally, detectives questioned Vic right away, and he denied any involvement and claimed he didn't know where Heather went that night. With no physical evidence in the early stages and no body, police couldn't charge him, but their suspicion remained. Investigators also considered other possibilities. For a time, they looked at a potential connection to another missing woman in the area. One of Heather's co-workers at the Waffle House, 32-year-old Michelle Whitaker, had vanished in August 2002, just a month before Heather. This coincidence raised fears of a serial predator and even speculation that Vic might somehow be involved in both cases. However, in 2008, Whitaker was found alive and well. She had left the state voluntarily and was apparently unaware that people back home thought she was missing. In October 2005, 3 years after Heather vanished, a dramatic turn of events cast new suspicion on Vic. That fall, Jonathan Vick was arrested and charged with an unrelated crime: the 1995 slaying of a local woman named Dana Satterfield. Satterfield, a 27-year-old hairdresser, had been slain in her Roebuck, South Carolina beauty salon. In 2006, Vick was convicted of that slaying and sentenced to life in prison. For Heather's loved ones and the authorities, this revelation was chilling. It confirmed that the man they suspected in her disappearance was undeniably capable of truly evil and heinous acts. Following Vick's conviction, Spartanburg authorities revisited Heather's cold case. In 2006, they discovered an abandoned car that had been registered to Vick, and inside it they found bloodstains and a few strands of long blonde hair. Investigators indicated that this evidence was believed to belong to Heather, though it's unclear from the sources what forensic testing was done at that time. That said, it was the most significant clue yet, potentially suggesting that Heather met with foul play at the hands of Jonathan Vick. Even so, the evidence alone wasn't enough to bring charges. By way of reminder, the prosecution only gets one shot to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense, on the other hand, has to prove absolutely nothing whatsoever. It may be helpful for their case to attempt to push back the evidence of the prosecution, but there are no reverse onuses placed upon the defendant in our legal system. The inherent problem with the bloodstains and a hair strand being found in Vick's vehicle is that she had been his girlfriend. It doesn't take a brilliant defense attorney to see how a plausible, innocent explanation for the presence of these materials could exist. To complicate matters even further, strictly speaking, the only evidence that Heather is deceased is circumstantial. Notably, the authorities thought the same and emphasized that they couldn't move forward without more definitive proof. Today, Jonathan Vick remains the prime suspect in Heather Sellers' disappearance. Nearly all signs point to him, from Heather's troubled history with Vick to the fact he was last with her, and the apparent traces of her blood in his vehicle. Alternative theories have been explored, but they seem less likely, both to the authorities and to casual observers such as myself. Some have wondered if Heather might have simply left town due to her fear of Vick and simply didn't let anyone know, so as to minimize any chance that she'd be tracked down. Theoretically, it's possible that she did this for the protection of the people around her as well, as Vick was capable of extreme violence and had threatened her. She may have been worried that giving anyone her location could make those people targets for reprisals as well. However, this of course is just speculation, and there's no evidence to indicate that this was the case. This narrative is also challenged by the fact that she could have come forward after Vick was convicted, though perhaps she had established a new and separate identity by that point. Another theory revolves around Heather's history of substance use, While she was reported to be clean at the time of her disappearance, witnesses reported believing that she was under the influence on the night in question. This has led some to believe that she may have suffered from an accidental overdose. As of 2025, the disappearance of Heather Sellers is still unsolved. If she's alive, Heather would be 42 years old today, though sadly the consensus is that she almost certainly isn't.